So today we're going to be, I think Loubna is going to be starting out talking about creating and strengthening our base. Dalit will be talking in particular about identifying targets and doing research, and she'll be giving some exciting examples from abroad, from some of the people who are even more advanced than we are today in the US. And I'll be giving some ideas about sustaining campaigns, as well as some ideas for campaigns happening here in the US and ways that we can support you in moving forward with them. So before we each talk individually, I wanted to get a sense from the group here of why you chose to come to this workshop. What are some reasons that you chose to come here, and maybe things that you might be struggling with or wondering yourselves? Yes.
Looking for hope. I'm looking for hope.
Okay.
5 seconds each.
More?
Building BDS campaigns on the local and national level.
I hope you can see this. Building BDS campaigns.
Looks like there's dark.
Others?
Networking.
All right. Thanks.
We all should have each other's email.
Otherwise, we'll just remember them.
Sharing what works.
Well, we'll just say them. Sharing what works. Others?
Influencing U.S. policy.
Okay. Influencing U.S. policy.
How to transform people into activists.
Transforming from sympathy and education into actual action. Yeah. Well, these are great, and hopefully we'll be at least touching upon some of them. And there will be a time for a Q&A at the end for us to fill in, let's say, some gaps of stuff we don't actually talk about. So.
I think, one of the first things that I like to say is my strength really is in mobilizing the grassroots. And one of the things that I found is that the campaign doesn't necessarily come before the mobilizing the bases, and the bases don't necessarily come before the campaign. It's a dialectical relationship, and that's something that I think we should all be really conscious of. On the one hand, I think one of the things that a lot of us in our organizing struggle with and sort of lack is that we're all over capacity, have such limited resources, and as a result we end up cutting some things out, like, okay, well, what is it that we don't need to deal with right now? What is it that we just need to do in order to be strategic and in order to succeed in our goals? And oftentimes the thing that gets cut out is sort of a reflection and an analytical process as to what it is that we're doing and where it is that we want to go. And so before I start, I just want to say that I'm a firm believer that there should be so much of a bridge between intellectual analysis and the actual activism that takes place on the ground. Because without that, we can't really think of new possibilities in terms of how we are able to organize. And I'm sure if many of you are familiar with a lot of social movement theory, a lot of folks would say the same thing, including Paulo Freire, who wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, would say it really takes the theoretical and activism to provide a new possibility for a praxis. With that said, I wanted to begin by talking about sort of distinguishing the differences between the type of work that we're all sort of engaged in. A lot of us who are doing BDS work are also doing other work or have been doing other work if we've been doing Palestine work for a long time. And we have to look at several of these initiatives, campaigns, activism, organizing, charismatic leadership, institutional leadership, all of these things as part of an umbrella, which is the movement. The movement of the people, the movement to see human rights in Palestine, the movement to see Palestinian self-determination and freedom. But at the same time, with each, we work within a different framework or paradigm, and we reflect on it in a different way. So one of the things that I wanted to say is a campaign includes organizing and it includes activism, but it includes something more, and that is a really well thought out strategic plan that isn't necessarily marked by like a deadline in terms of time if we're not ready for it. So sometimes, I know that my colleagues and I differ about this, sometimes when we launch a campaign before we're ready, before our bases are ready, before our young people are ready, it can discourage people and it can make people feel demoralized. And for me, in my experience, it's so much worth investing our energy in things that we really are ready for. And it takes a lot of preparation work to get us ready to that place, but that's where hopefully we as organizers are prepared to put in that energy. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the actual bases in which we're working with. So I know several of you are coming from different organizing bases. Some of you are coming from faith-based groups, student groups, Arab communities, Muslim communities, Palestinian communities, you know, sort of the residue of former PLO institutions in the United States, you know, the OGs, the old-timers that were active in the 70s and 60s. Those are a lot of the folks that are organizing in the Bay. And situating a campaign that doesn't necessarily come out of one group, but that is actually in a way determined in a coalitional fashion has, in my experience, been the most effective and efficient campaigns. Because, and I know that sounds crazy and completely unrealistic, like the whole false consciousness of unity. Like, how are we supposed to bring everyone together and get millions of these bases and all of these organizers to agree on one campaign or its goals or its principles? But I think that it can be done. I think that it can be done by organizing or by really situating new models of the kinds of goals and principles that we're trying to achieve in the campaign. I think that one of the challenges that we've experienced in the United States in terms of Palestine organizing historically and today is so many different groups emerging and then splintering off of each other. So many campaigns emerging and then, you know, just sort of dissolving at the end because people lose power or lose faith, or, you know, we have some sort of barrier that inhibits us from continuing. And I think part of the problem with these groups and campaigns is that we always think about it from the perspective of two things. One is identity politics, and two is representation entities. Representation entities in that I am from the Christian community, I am representing the Christian community's belief on Palestine or what should happen to the Palestinians. I am from the Palestinian community and I am representing all Palestinians' perspectives on Palestine. Mm-hmm. Or I am from, you know, the anti-Zionist Jewish community and I represent Jewish voices on Palestine. The concept of how we've been determining a lot of the principles in our campaigns and why it can be complicated when we include identity politics is that it's not necessarily about universal principles that we can all agree on. And so a lot of the campaigns, when we begin them, and as more challenges come up in sort of the discourse and how we're doing the work, we have to think about how do we set forth a set of principles that are universal principles, that are about human dignity, that are about universal principles of justice and dignity and self-determination. And a lot of those things are already set for us and enshrined in international law. I mean, we really don't have to do the work to that regard, but we do have to do the work in terms of defending it within the current political climate that we're living in today. At the same time, people who have thought identity politics is the problem historically. First it was the Arab movement working for Palestine, then it was the Palestinians, now it's only solidarity, or now it's only these bases. One of the problems of how we've responded to that is to say, forget it. We're all the same, we're colorblind, we're all working on this together, it is about these universal principles and that's it. But I don't necessarily think that's the answer either. I think that there has to be a reflection process about the different subjectivities and the different forms of power and privilege from the communities that we're coming from. You know, the Black community can relate to Palestine in a particular way because there are experiences of segregation and apartheid and oppression that hits very close to home for many of them. Anti-Zionist Jewish communities can relate to Palestine because they feel that they're very integrated in part of this struggle as having to sort of confront the oppressor from within the belly of the beast, you know, from within that community. And so I think that this is something that we should all be really conscious of, that we're not colorblind, we're not all the same, we don't all have the same stakes, and we don't all have necessarily the same role. But we do have a distinct role considering where we come from that can contribute to the amount of leverage that we're able to sort of pull through in the initiatives that we're working on. The next thing I wanted to talk about was identifying the various sectors in our community. A lot of us are working within organizations. I'm very pro-organizations. I'm very pro-structure. I think a lot of people are very, whatever, it should be popular in grassroots, and to them that they think that that doesn't necessarily take structure and organizing or organizational bases. But I do think that there's a way that our organizational bases have to work, whether or not we're within the current moment of a campaign, that creates sort of a coalitional effort across local lines and across national lines that creates sort of the impetus to launch that campaign. So one of the things that I was going to talk about was identifying the various communities in your area. There's the Arab communities, the Muslim communities, the Palestinian, the students, the youth. And then there's a lot of communities that are not doing Palestine organizing, or not necessarily only focusing on Palestine work, that are untapped allies. Teachers are what I have found to be one of our strongest allies, because they know the history and sort of the moral side of this debate is really on the side of the Palestinians. And I think that educational institutions and teachers are really, for example, a base that we haven't necessarily brought into our bases. Other social justice organizers, people who are working on immigration, immigrant rights, people who are working on against gang injunctions, people who are working on all these issues. It's not that we want to bring them into Palestine work, but rather connecting the struggles is something so important in order for us to be effective in terms of creating the kind of change that we want on a local level and creating the kind of change that we want to see in Palestine. An example of this would be, a lot of us are doing Palestine work specifically to see human rights for Palestinians. A lot of us have particular Palestinian communities more so on our mind because of what's happening, for example, in Gaza. But at the same time, FBI raids of Palestinian communities in the United States, censorship of Palestinian students in the United States, those are things that are not a separate issue, but rather very much integrated in terms of the work it is that we're trying to achieve. So I think that in terms of actually finding sort of a mutual ground of struggling against injustice has, for me, been has given me a lot of flexibility and has been able to put me in a lot of spaces where I've been able to learn from my allies in terms of what works and what doesn't, and vice versa. And so I think that's something that we should be really conscious of. Just if you guys can let me know when I'm
But
late.
it's been, I think it's 10 minutes.
Okay, good. I would like to talk about two campaigns that we worked on in the Bay Area that, and a little bit of the history that predated the campaigns that really were successful for us. One of which was the flotilla resolution. Did any of you guys follow that? There was a flotilla resolution that we had brought to the Board of Supervisors of San Francisco last year. I think maybe 1 month after the attack on the flotilla. And the interesting thing about the resolution is that there was so much coalitional work that had started in the Bay Area since 2008. I'm going to accredit Noura Houri, who's standing in the room here, because she really pulled together all sectors of our community to work on a concert that happened in 2008. It was the Nekbe 4060 concert. And at that time, it was almost in a way one of the first times that we were gathering OGs from the Palestinian Arab community who hadn't talked to each other in years, various organizations who had been like, you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing, we want nothing to do with you. And we pulled together to do this event, and we organized for this event for, I think, 6 months? Was it longer? 3 months. 3 months. Okay, we got it together fast. But actually bringing around so many different groups to the table at that time really sort of replenished the Bay Area environment in terms of Palestine work. And I mean, a lot of history of bad blood, a lot of history of sort of egos, and a lot of history of, well, we're working on different things. And that one event, which is activism, was able to sort of bring us together in terms of preparing us to have like a coalitional model, or like, a coalitional model that was able to do bigger and better things later on. After that, the community jointly started doing a lot more collective work together, defending 9 Arab students who were arrested at a protest and charged with 3 felony counts for one of which was conspiracy for terrorism. These are young Arab American students who were arrested at a demonstration. So that's sort of building in terms of getting them out of the jails. A lot of that's organizing, a lot of that's activism. But in many ways it led up to more, it led up for us to be able to strengthen and expand our base in order to launch a more successful campaign. So around the flotilla time, it only took a month to say, everyone come to the table. Let's put this flotilla in front of the Board of Supervisors, but also what had predated that was a very strong relationship with the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Each one of us from the coalition would have regular meetings, stop in on their offices, send them emails, call them, go to their art exhibits, you know, send them messages about what was happening in the Palestinian community or what was happening in Palestine, invite them to come and speak in our community centers. And we came to the flotilla resolution, and after lots of phone calls, like behind the scenes, we're like, okay, how many votes do we have? How many votes before they vote? Who do we have? We have Mar, we have Mayor Karimi, we have, and in the end, we thought about it and we said, you know what? We have a majority vote. And the resolution specifically called for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors to condemn the attack, the Israeli attack on the flotilla, to call for an immediate end to the siege on Gaza, and to call for Palestinian rights and end to the settlements in the West Bank. We knew that we had a majority vote. But there was one Board of Supervisor who would not vote for it. And so what ends up happening is it gets taken into committee, but after it was taken into committee, it was taken into committee with two other Board of Supervisors who were also convinced not to pass the resolution. It wasn't a failure for us, because for us, it was inspiring to know we can take our work to the next level. And while this was a very short-lived campaign, there was a lot of work that had predated it that can continue. Another huge success that we had last year, which also was sort of years and years and years of organizing ahead of time and creating the relationship, is we shut down the ports and stopped two Israeli Zimline ships from coming in. We had over 1,000 people show up at 4 in the morning to stop the ports, to stand at the picket lines, and the labor union actually wrote a statement saying, we are participating in this action. We are going to agree with our allies to boycott these ships from bringing in Israeli products. Now, our goal was only to stop one ship, but we stayed there long enough, and then we went home for a couple hours, and we came back, we stopped a second Israeli ship, which was not even part of the campaign. It was not even part of sort of the project. But the thing about these short-term, sort of victories is that they inspire us. And the thing about this work is that it doesn't really come with a lot of advantages except personal fulfillment, which I think I also have thoughts about us needing to be very self-reflective and critical about, like, in order to remain humble, because what it is that we're doing, like the kind of work that we're doing requires us to be humble. But it also comes with a lot of hardships. It comes with a lot of wasted time and energy and arguments and fragmentation in the community and censorship, and a lot of young people feel like they're jeopardizing their careers. A lot of young people feel like, how vocal can I be about Palestine without hurting myself or my family, And I think that one of the things that makes up for that is to know that we can go to the next level. That these short-term victories that inspire us make us think in terms of, okay, we can actually mobilize the grassroots even further, and we can discuss a longer-term, more strategic campaign that has its parameters, that has specific principles, and we don't necessarily have to compromise those principles when we hit the barrier. That's the last point I wanted to stop on, which is when we are challenged and when things are just in crisis mode in our communities, and we hit these barriers, a lot of the times immediate instinct is change the discourse, make us look more mainstream, make us look less radical, make us look like we're asking for less. But at the end of the day, if you think about it, in our work, we're asking for a really bare minimum. We're asking just for Palestinians to be recognized as human beings, for their rights to be met, for their needs to be met. And the last thing that I would want to say on behalf of a lot of the bases that I'm organizing with is Palestinian human rights is something that has really been sort of become much more visible and much more popular because of the amount of solidarity work that has been taking place internationally, from international civil society and in the United States. But that shouldn't come at the expense of Palestinian national aspirations. It's not that now civil society is determining the terms of what the Palestinians should have and should not have. but rather that Palestinian rights is something that we're all a part of because it's a human struggle. It's something that, you know, as American citizens, we are paying our tax dollars to the country that's supporting Israel, but at the same time, we have to respect and situate both Palestinian needs and Palestinian national aspirations at the center of all of our analysis. And they need to determine the future of their struggle. I know that's really hard for people to hear, specifically because of the turmoil and fragmentation within Palestinian communities right now, but we're working on it. You know, just like you guys are working on it, we're working on it, and there's an amazing group of young Palestinians, both inside Palestine and internationally, that are very, very principled, very, very justice-centered, and saying, we don't want any more corrupt leadership, we don't want any more censorship, and we want a new Palestine, the same way the youth in Libya and Egypt and Tunisia are sort of calling for. So together we can do it.